be honest, we want to be the drummer that people really enjoy playing with. The drummer who's super musical and just always has the best ideas for parts and for fills and songs. But how are we supposed to get there when we feel like we're just playing the same 3 fills over and over? Well, today we're breaking down the frustration of feeling like you're not creative and feeling like you're just doomed to play the same uninspiring fills over and over. Because you are creative, you can do this, you've just got to have some guidelines, some stepping stones to get there. Number 1, I will show you the easiest fill creativity hack there is. Really cool. And number 2, I'll show you the trick to creating endless fills without running out of ideas. This is how I create fills, and this is how you improvise fills. Very cool. And number 3, super practical and simple, especially if you're new to the drums, how to make an existing fill, however simple, feel fresh and new. This is really cool stuff. This is super practical and actionable. I think you're going to get a lot out of this. There's also a PDF notation guide you can grab with all the exercises we're covering, so be sure to get that. You can do this. Let's dive in. Hey, welcome to the Non-Glamorous Drummer. I'm so glad you're joining me today. I'm all about helping you become the drummer that people actually want to play with, the drummer who sounds musical and professional and is solid thanks to learning the core drumming skills that really matter. That's what we're all about teaching here on this channel. And what's cool is that even if you're tight on time, in 30 minutes a day, you can learn these skills. Even if you feel like you lack talent, you can learn these skills. And hey, I bet you're wanting to nail grooves and fills and be able to just sit down and play songs. But there's a problem that tends to get in our way that almost all of us face. And it's this. You have a weak hand. You have a weak hand that's holding you back and keeping you from playing fills evenly. We're talking about fills today. We know we've got to solve the weak hand. That weak hand is just wreaking havoc on everything you play and just making things sloppy, and it's frustrating you, and you might even be embarrassed by that lack of technique. And so I know how frustrating that is because I've been there. I've dealt with a weak left hand that keeps me from playing fills cleanly and that doesn't play strong backbeats well and that couldn't play very fast. And so I had to find the right things to practice to overcome that. And that's what I would like to teach you. I've got a totally free mini course that I want you to go enroll in right now, or you can wait till after you've watched this lesson. But very soon, today, I want you to enroll in this mini course. It's totally free. It's called Eliminate Your Weak Hand in 3 Steps. So in 3 parts, in this 3-step plan, we eliminate your weak hand, giving you confidence to play fills cleanly and powerfully and in a compelling way so that you can just confidently know that, hey, I'm doing things right and I'm balanced and I can play whatever I want to play. That's a great feeling. I want to give you freedom here. What's cool is that this process is simple and achievable, even if you're tight on time, even if you feel like you don't have a lot of talent. It's fine. 30 minutes a day of dedicated practice, you can get this done. So click the link in the description to get started because you do not need to deal with a weak hand a day longer. Let's go solve this right now. I want you to be the confident drummer who nails fills. So in light of all that, let's get into today's lesson all about fills and how to be creative with fills. This is going to be a lot of fun. The easiest fill creativity hack there is. I told you that we'd start with this because this is something super simple and it's not difficult to do. There are some challenges associated with it, but I want to give you something that's pretty straightforward first to test out, because if you haven't taken this approach to creating fills, then you're missing out on a lot of potential creativity. So it's this. All we're going to do is we're going to play singles. And by the way, something that I've talked about in other lessons and that I always want you practicing are just simple alternating singles, whether it's on your snare, practice pad, whatever. Then apply that to the kit by moving it around the kit. So that might mean something like that. Of course, if you have another tom here, then you can always throw that in there. Doesn't matter how many drums you're hitting, whatever. Point is, move around the kit and play singles. So that's something we can start with, and the most basic, generally the most basic drum fills we know of are something like that, where it's like ga 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 go 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 go, which most of the time we're not even going to play because maybe that fill has been heard so many times and it's not always appropriate to just play a straight 16th fill around the kit. A lot of times we need to shake things up a little bit and make it more interesting, and that's probably what we want to do, and I hope that's what you want to do too, and that's why you're here watching this lesson. So first thing we can do is either add in accents or add in toms. So let's say we're just playing a fill on the snare. Let's say our fill is so just a whole measure of 16ths on the snare. So we could add in accents. We could do something like, or we could even hit the toms instead of doing accents. And suddenly we've got something really interesting. Now, the challenge with this is that it tends to throw the ear off. When suddenly you're moving around, you're hearing something different. And so you're actually having to become very aware of the melody that's coming out of your fill at this point. Otherwise, it ends up kind of feeling like randomness that your brain has a hard time comprehending, and it's hard to remember when to move to the other drum and when to throw in the accents. So we're going to talk a little more about playing melodically in a moment. We're going to get into that. But first, I just want to show you 3 simple examples you can get started with of 16th notes, but with accents, which could also be placed on the toms instead. So here's the first one. And here's the second one. And the third one. Now with each of these, I was keeping quarter note time with my left foot. That was just for reference so you could feel where the beat was. You don't have to do that, though it's a great thing to add in there too, whether it's quarter notes with right foot or left foot, kind of as a timekeeping, a pulse keeping, because a lot of times when you play fills, this is a side note, but a lot of times when you play fills in songs, if it's like a 4 on the floor kind of song, then you want to keep that 4 on the floor pulse going, and so you actually want to keep your kick drum quarter notes going while you're playing the fill. That is a very song-specific thing, but you definitely want to be able to do that eventually. So I would encourage you to practice these with timekeeping like that, though that's definitely optional starting out. Also, be sure to use stick height so you're smoothly moving back and forth. Even if you're not hitting hard, you want to make sure your sticks are moving in those arc motions, and that's why the prerequisite here is smooth, steady singles on the snare, which you can then apply around the kit. And actually, if you can sit there and just randomly move around the kit, staying in time, just slow 16ths, right, left, sticking never changes, but just randomly change the surface you hit. If you can get comfortable doing that, that goes a long way towards building some of that freedom to being able to create unique fills. What you want to eventually do is start listening to the rhythms you're creating based on the instruments you're hitting, based on maybe the toms that you're hitting. But to be able to randomly do that while keeping it steady, that's an important skill too, and so that can be a really fun thing to try. But now, our part 2 for this lesson, the trick to creating endless fills without running out of ideas. So we hinted at this already, and it's basically this. Think of a rhythm and then reproduce the rhythm with your hands. Because if you think of fills as rhythms or melodies, going even a step deeper here, instead of just a bunch of notes, then suddenly you have a lot more to pull from. And so if you think to yourself, okay, think of that rhythm and say, okay, there's my rhythm. There's a million ways you could play that around the kit. You could just play it on the snare. Or what would probably be more natural would be to start it on the snare, finish it on the toms. Because that's another thing, if you've got a rhythm in mind, and maybe it's just feeling a little unnatural and too robotic, try finishing it going down the kit. So maybe start it up here, but work your way down the kit and finish down here. That way it kind of has that falling down the stairs, and it feels like it's finishing and it feels like it's leading into something. That's another just quick hack for making a fill feel better. Sometimes you just need to land somewhere, like it needs to go somewhere, and a good way to make a fill go somewhere is to move it around the kit. But that's the concept. That's all there is to it. Think of a rhythm and then play that rhythm on your kit. It doesn't matter what sticking you do whatever makes sense to you. It doesn't matter which drums you hit. Ultimately, that's up to you. But when you combine what we talked about a minute ago about using different drums to create different melodies and rhythms in your playing, you've got that possibility there if you're just playing singles. But now we can take this a step further and actually start with that rhythm, start with that melody, and then go from there and creating different variations. Basically, a bonus level here would be, all right, we're going to play our rhythm with our hands, but we're going to fill in the spaces with the kick. And so if our fill is, maybe that's our fill, we could also fill in space with the kick, especially if we're going a little slower. And so that's something else cool you can do when you're doing a slower fill like that. You can actually fill in some of the space with the kick, which gives it a linear feel. Now, don't let that be complicated or overwhelming, because I know that that's challenging if you haven't done it before. So first, start with just a rhythm and applying the rhythm around the kit, and know that the kick thing is something you can always add in later. But I want to give you some very specifics here to practice. So here are 3 rhythmic ideas, just 3 rhythms, 3 melodies even. You can think of these as melodies that you can play. I've got them notated, by the way, if I didn't mention it already. I've got a PDF notation guide to help you out here, so you can see everything that I've played today, everything we're talking about, all written out, organized in action steps and notation form. That way you can take it to the practice room and take action on it. Even if you're new to notation, it's very logical, and I think it's going to make sense if you follow along in the guide as you're going back and watching this lesson again. So here are 3 rhythm ideas and some ways that you can create variations on them. Now, my goal here isn't just to teach you fills. My goal isn't just to give you more fills to stow away in your brain and then pull from when you're on a gig or when you're learning a song. What I'm trying to teach you here is a way of creating fills, a method for coming up with them. And by giving you all these specific examples, I want those to be your kickstart to get going and to get you started. So these are totally random. There's not like a logical progression here of these different fills. It's not like we went from easy to hard. This is literally just me coming up with stuff, and I want you to do the same. I want you to come up with a rhythm and figure out how can I implement that rhythm on the kit. And hopefully my examples will just help you get started, help you maybe think outside the box if you're new to this. Because what I ultimately want you to do is use melody as your guiding voice. This is kind of where we're zeroing in with this lesson. That's the number one thing that I want you doing. I want you to use melody. So when you're playing a song, be listening to the vocal part, be listening to the hook, the lead line maybe, and thinking about, all right, what's the rhythm there? Like, what is the rhythmic melody of that vocal part? So what's something I could play that would match that? Because if you can think that way and you can come up with fills that match things that are already going on in the song, your fill is way more likely to fit. It's way more likely to feel musical and appropriate for that song. Because sometimes you need song-specific fills. Sometimes it's not just about playing this fill because I know this fill. Yes, there are simple fills that work like that. We'll talk about some of those in a moment with our last point where we talk about making existing fills feel fresh and new, which is pretty cool. But we also want to be able to play song-specific fills and maybe play a fill that interacts with something another musician is doing in real time. And when you get better at listening for these things, you get better at doing this. And of course, this is a culmination of a lot of skills. If this is something you're having trouble with, know that if you're always working on those three things, kind of that three-pronged approach that I always talk about, working on hand technique, working on coordination, and working on listening, just sitting down and listening to music, taking the time to do that. Those three things work together to give you this ability. And being able to play melodically and interact and improvise is a big culmination of that. And it's something that takes time. But I really hope that this is helping you get started. So let's get into our third part here. How to make an existing fill feel fresh and new. So if everything leading up to this has seemed maybe not as simple as you'd like it to be, or kind of complex and it's going to take some time, that's okay. This last thing I think is going to give you something very tangible to work on right now, even if you're a beginner. Because what we're going to do, we're going to start a basic fill on a different part of the beat. And there's some complex ways to do this. There's also some very simple ways. For instance, the Pat Boone, Debbie Boone fill. So that one we've all heard, even if you haven't heard that term for it, it's the Pat Boone, Debbie Boone crash. Usually snare, tom, tom. Generally, that's how it ends up being orchestrated. And that's one of those fills that you could play in so many songs, and it just always feels right. Something about it where it's kind of it starts on the snare, it moves down the kit, so it's going somewhere. It's a good setup like we were talking about a minute ago. So it just makes sense. And anytime we play that, it's going to start on beat 3. 1, 2, 3, and a 4, E, and 1. But let's say we wanted to actually play this fill, but make it feel totally different. What if we shifted it over a 16th? Because that's what we're getting at here. What if we take a basic fill and we start it at a different time? That gives us a totally different, very unique fill potentially. So we could play Pat Boone, Debbie Boone, but start it on the of 2. And so instead of playing 1, 2, we could play 1, 2. Now, it gets kind of weird when you're used to hearing it one way, but what you could do is and delay that last part and finish it that way. So if you're starting the fill differently, you can finish it however you want to, whatever makes the most sense to you. But the fact that you've started it at a different place makes the whole fill feel different. It's kind of an interesting thing about fills. Where you start them kind of determines how they end up feeling. And so it doesn't matter so much what happens in the middle or even how you finish it. How you start it is what the listener is going to remember the most. So we're just starting at a 16th early. 1 E and a 2 E and... So I would go ahead and finish it out and just play 16ths the whole way out so that it makes sense, so it doesn't feel like it awkwardly slid over fill. So think of it that way. So many of the most unique fills that I hear are not complicated. They don't have more notes. That's not the answer for making a fill unique and cool. The answer is just shift it over, just make it slightly different, start it at a different spot. There's actually a lot of unique fills that I hear that start on the of 2, because I think it's drummers thinking, all right, how can we make this fill swing a little bit? How can we make it feel really cool and energetic? Let's just start it at 16th early. But here's something a little easier, because I know that might not be easy right off the bat, especially if you're trying to keep time with your left foot to keep you honest, which is, again, a great exercise to do. But here's something a little simpler. So we might have our basic fill where we're like, easy enough, but what if we start that fill a 16th early? So we start on the of 3. Same 4 notes, we've just shifted them a 16th early. Not difficult. You could even still play that last note on the of 4, and you could play. But see how it gives it a different feel? We're just starting, we're adding in one more note, but it gives it a different kind of unique feel. Likewise, if we had a fill like that starting on beat 3, kind of like Pat Boone, W Boone, we could start that on the of 2. So we could play, and instead of doing that on beat 3, we could go, and it just changes the feel slightly. It makes it feel fresh and new without hardly doing anything to it. Now, kind of along the lines of what we were doing with that Pat Boone, W Boone fill, what I really like to do is start a fill on the of 2 rather, on the of 2 whenever possible. So instead of going 1, 2, 3, starting something on beat 3, I really like the feel of starting a fill on the of 2. There's something about that of 2, and it just gives a fill so much swing and movement that's really interesting. And even if you don't initially start it on the of 2, if you start maybe on beat 2 or on the and of 1, but throw in an accent on the of 2, it sounds really cool. Now, don't get lost in all of the technical counting and all of the kind of the details of this, because the reason why I think this sounds so cool, listen to this beat. We've heard that beat a million times. It's in so many songs. It was in a lot of 90s rock. We hear that kind of pattern in hip hop and rap. And it has this swing to it and this syncopation because of that kick note that's on the of 2. There's our of 2. 1, 2, So why don't we incorporate that into a fill, especially if we're playing a fill in a song like that? So there I just hit the rack thumb on the of 2. Boom, ba, ba, doom, 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 ga. So you can potentially play a fill that carries on the kick pattern that's going on there without playing the actual kick pattern. You're keeping that rhythm in mind, and that's a really cool musical approach to fills. Honestly, so I genuinely hope that that I'm not overcomplicating anything, because what I'm hoping here is to just shed some light on the fact that fills don't need to be overthought. If you pull them from rhythms that are in songs, from rhythms that are in your existing kick pattern, from the melody, you can really get a lot of cool stuff happening. And so literally you can make up a fill that is based on the kick drum pattern. If it's boom, ba, boom, ba, boom, da, doom, doom, ba, doom, doom. Doesn't have to be complicated. Now you might feel like your execution of it's a little bit sloppy, and that's why you tend to stick to more straight fills, because suddenly you feel like things get sloppy when they get syncopated. That's okay, because this takes time. And that's what I definitely want to leave you with here, that like with anything on the drums, there's a level of patience and discipline that has to be involved. These things don't happen overnight. And I know for me personally, I saw in professional drummers, when I was in high school, I saw that the professional drummers were able to play simple fills better than I could, because I got sloppy and I tripped over myself. But when you're employing good hand technique, when you're practicing your slow singles and you're able to maneuver those slow singles around the kit and have that loose, relaxed approach, all that you're doing when you're playing simple but syncopated fills is you're just taking out notes. It's kind of like if you're going back to the and we're just doing that, we're just going to take out a note here and there, and now suddenly we've got something syncopated and we're still just moving freely around the kit and playing in time. And so you always want to have that approach of bam, boom, bam, boom, moving with it, allowing your sticks to move to fill the space so that that space doesn't have to be awkward. I think there's just a human desire to fill spaces. We don't want there to be a lot of space in our playing, and it makes us uncomfortable, even though we know it sounds better. We want to fill it. But the more you can relax and let your sticks move to fill in the space, the easier it gets. So it's all about the prep strokes too. It's kind of like with backbeats when you're trying to play slowly. Up, down, and boom. Up, down, and ba, boom. Or you can play super sparse fills like that when you're thinking, like moving in that relaxed manner. That takes time to develop, but be patient with it and do your best to relax as you're playing and become okay with that space. When you become okay with the space and you don't let it be an awkward thing, enjoy the space, take confidence and satisfaction in that simple space in your playing. That's going to help so much with the syncopation and being able to just play these rhythms and these melodies that you hear in a song or that you just hear in your head. So, like I said, all these examples, all this stuff that I've somewhat made up and improvised is written out in the PDF notation guide. So I want you to go get that because that gives you the concrete, here's what to practice to begin putting this into action. If you have any questions, if anything here was complicated, didn't make sense, you'd like me to clarify, send me an email. I'd like to help you out here, make sure that you are good to go. So go grab that guide. I hope that'll help you out so you know exactly what to practice. But of course, feel free to reach out if you have any questions because I want all this to be super clear. I want you to be the creative drummer you're made to be and be able to create unique fills. We don't want to just pull from a fill vocabulary. We want to be able to create on the spot and ultimately improvise. And what we covered today are some great stepping stones to being able to do that. All right, also before you go, be sure to enroll in my free mini course. I told you about that earlier. It's a no-brainer. If you have any struggle going on with your weekend, that's going to wreak havoc on your ability to do any of what we talked about today. And so that's kind of another story, but you can solve that. You don't have to deal with the weekend. You can free it up so you can play even balanced fills. Follow my 3-step plan, take action on those 3 steps, and you're going to be playing with confidence where you can just sit down and play fills and ultimately eventually be able to improvise and just play songs, play with people, and feel good about your playing and not be embarrassed by that weak left hand that doesn't want to do what it's supposed to. Let's solve that frustration. Let's just end that because you should not have to deal with a weekend a day longer. So go enroll in the course. Know that this is achievable. You can do this. 30 minutes of practice a day. Doesn't matter whether you feel like you lack talent. Doesn't matter how old you are, where you're starting from. This is the method that you can work through. Even out your hands. I really want you to do this because otherwise this lesson today isn't a lot of good if you've got a weekend that's holding you back. So eliminate your weekend in 3 steps. Dive into the mini course. It's totally free. The link is in the description below. As always, thanks so much for watching. Thanks for hanging out today. I hope this lesson provided you with a lot of value. Hope you have a great week. Subscribe if you're new. I'll see you on the next lesson. Stay non-glamorous.